All rise. We will lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience de la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated. Vous asseoir.
Good morning, everyone. Could the court officer please call the case?
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Situation in Uganda in the case of the prosecutor versus Dominic Ongwen, case reference ICC 0204-0115, and for the record, we are in open session.
Thank you. I ask for the appearances of the parties. We start with the prosecution. Madam Prosecutor, please.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. The prosecution is represented today by myself, Fatou Bensouda, and my team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the legal representatives of victims, first Ms. Masida, please.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. The common legal representative of victims is appearing today with Ms. Caroline Walter and myself. I am Paulina Masida. Our field counsel, Mr. Walter Komakech, is able to follow this hearing from Uganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see Mr. Mavira, please.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. The legal representatives are represented by Mr. Joseph Manoba, who is following the proceedings from Kampala.
Good morning, Mr. President.
Good morning.
And Your Honors.
Mr. Francisco Koch is following the proceedings from Mexico.
Good morning, Your Honors, Mr. President.
Good morning, Mr. Cox.
Our legal assistant, Ms. Anushka Semi, is following the proceedings from Nairobi.
Good morning, Mr. President and Your Honors.
Good morning.
We also have Ms. Maria Radziowska following the proceedings from Warsaw.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning.
Good morning.
And our field assistant, Ms. Priscilla Aling, is following the proceedings from Kampala.
Good morning, Your Honors.
Good morning.
And one of our field assistants is also monitoring it from Gulu, Ms. Listowella Tor.
Good morning, Your Honors.
Good morning.
And myself, James Moira, for the legal representatives. Thank you.
And you are following it from inside the courtroom?
Yes, indeed, Your Honor. Thank you.
Then for the defense, please, Mr. Ayena, you have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. President and Your Honors. I am Crispus Ayena Odongo, leading the defense team. I'm accompanied by Tom Oboff, Gordon Kifude, Morgan Hasley, who are both in court. And in the gallery, we have Maria Helene Prolo and Mr. Michael Rose. Thank you, Mr. President.
And the accused is also present. Your client is also present.
Yes, my lord. Our client, Mr. Dominic Ongwen, is in court.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your reminder.
Yeah. Today we are gathered in this courtroom for the chamber to pronounce in open session its decision under Article 74 of the statute on Dominic Ongwen's criminal responsibility for the charges brought against him. As provided for by the law, this shall also include the delivery of a summary of the Chamber's main findings and conclusions in that regard. The Chamber will first provide such a summary. After that, it will be read out the verdict rendered by the Chamber on Dominic Ongwen. The written judgment has been issued this morning and will be notified shortly after the conclusion of today's hearing. It remains the only authoritative document. As I said, the Chamber will start with a summary, and since this has been an exceptionally extensive and complex case, To do justice to it, this summary will therefore also take some time. This case concerns crimes against humanity and war crimes which took place in northern Uganda between 1st July 2002 and 31st December 2005. During the course of this trial, the Chamber has heard from a large number of witnesses terrible accounts of these events and the extreme suffering that the civilian population of northern Uganda experienced during this time. However, the Lord Resistance Army, the LRA, has been active since the 1980s, and the conflict in northern Uganda has spanned 4 decades. This case has therefore also shed light on the history of northern Uganda in the past decades and on the suffering of its people during the conflict. The LRA pursued an armed rebellion against the government of Uganda. The LRA, including Dominic Ongwen, perceived as associated with the government of Uganda and thus as the enemy, the civilians living in northern Uganda. This concerned in particular those who lived in government-established internally displaced persons camps, so-called IDP camps. LRA commanders routinely declared that civilians were failing to support the LRA in its effort against the government and should be killed by the LRA. Throughout the period of the charges, the LRA killed and injured a large number of civilians in numerous attacks on individual civilians, IDP camps, and other civilian locations in Uganda. In response to the question whether shooting a civilian during the course of an attack would constitute an offense, witness P14, an LRA fighter, stated that, quote, "Nobody would see it as a crime if a civilian is injured or if a civilian is shot at," unquote. The LRA also abducted and conscripted a large number of children under the age of 15 into the armed group and used them to participate actively in hostilities. Witness P307, from his experience of an ordinary senior soldier, observed, quote, "As a standard practice, each time we came across people, we would abduct them and take them to the bush. We had to do this, as we had to increase our numbers in the bush. So abducting new recruits was part of routine activities during attacks, so that there was no need for any commander to order you to abduct, because this was part of the job." The LRA abducted and also enslaved a large number of female civilians. They were then used as sexual slaves and so-called wives, and as domestic servants. The Chamber will explain this in more detail later. Dominic Ongwen himself was abducted in 1987 at the age of around 9 by the LRA. The Chamber is aware that he experienced much suffering in his childhood and youth. The Chamber might have to evaluate this in a later context. However, this case is about crimes committed by Dominic Ongwen as a fully responsible adult and as a commander of the LRA in his mid to late 20s. During the period relevant to the charges from 1st July 2002 to 31st December 2005, Dominic Ongwen made a steep rise in the hierarchy of the LRA, from battalion commander to commander of the Senior Brigade in the rank of brigadier. Altogether, at the time relevant to the charges, Senior Brigade included several hundred soldiers who were under the command of Dominic Ongwen. The LRA hostility towards people living in IDP camps is at the core of the present case. A significant number of crimes committed by the accused relate to attacks carried out against some of these camps. The IDP camps were the result of an anti-insurgency strategy adopted by the Ugandan government to remove the population from rural areas where it might assist the rebels. either out of choice or due to fear of what would happen to them if they did not. In some instances, such removals are claimed to have been violently enforced. The camps were supposed to be protected by small units of the Ugandan National Army, known as the Ugandan People's Defense Force, or UPDF, and local defense units made up of local men and youth under UPDF command. However, this protection proved to be insufficient and illusory in many cases. Cultivation for the civilian population was very difficult, and movement outside the camps strictly limited. Food and other commodities had to be provided by aid agencies, such as the World Food Programme. At the peak, around 2004, there were hundreds of IDP camps. While there were still some people living outside, around the towns, almost the entire population of the region was in such camps, amounting to 1.5 million people. The living conditions in these camps were in many cases degrading. The government of Uganda did not provide the population with enough food, the hygienic conditions were deplorable, medical assistance often not existent. The Chamber will now summarize in more detail its main findings on the crimes committed by Dominic Ongwen, starting with the attacks on 4 of these IDP camps. Prior to doing so, let me emphasize that it was difficult for the Chamber to ascertain the names of every victim of the several crimes. Yet, in many cases, the Chamber was able to do so. These victims have a right not to be forgotten. They have the right to be mentioned explicitly today, as they are in the judgment as well. Please bear with me if I pronounce names incorrectly. In the early morning of 10th October 2003, several hundreds of LRA fighters, including Dominic Ongwen, attacked Pajula IDP camp. Pajula IDP camp was situated in Aru County, Padea district. Amongst the LRA fighters were also some under the age of 15. The LRA forces were heavily armed with weapons, including an anti-tank weapon, an anti-aircraft gun, machine guns, assault rifles, as well as pangas, machetes, and knives. People in the camp had been celebrating Uhuru Day, the Ugandan Independence Day, the night before. The attack had been planned several days before at a meeting by a number of LRA commanders, including Dominic Ongwen. The meeting was led by Vincent Oti, then number 2 of the LRA. The attackers had been briefed to attack the UPDF at the barracks, as well as civilian areas of the camp. The goal was to loot equipment, food, and other items. The attackers were also told to abduct civilians. The LRA fighters attacking the camp were organized in several units. The overall commander of the attack was Raska Lukwia. Dominic Ongwen led a group of attackers to fight at the barracks before directing them to attack the trading center within the camp. Government soldiers who were within the camp amongst the civilians fled in the face of the attacking force, while government soldiers in the barracks managed to hold the barracks under heavy fire from the LRA. In the course of the fight with the government soldiers, also several LRA fighters were killed. At the trading center, Dominic Ongwen directed his fighters to attack. He ordered his fighters to pillage food items and supplies from shops and homes within the camp. There was widespread looting throughout the camp. The LRA raided the trading center, broke into shops and looted food and livestock, medicine, household goods, and all sorts of valuables from the civilians. During the course of the attack, LRA fighters killed at least 4 civilians who tried to escape or refused to carry looted goods. They were Kinyera Benson Lachung, Pangarasio Onek, 2 unarmed persons, a woman killed by a machete, and an abductee killed by the meeting location. LRA fighters also abducted hundreds of civilians from the camp. Among these abductees were Witness P6, her neighbor, her 3 relatives, Witness P81, Witness P249 and his wife, Benson Ochok, Dick Okot and his family members, Rod Joseph Oiwak, Charles Bongomin, Oriema Kadogo, Sunday Abalo, Charles Ayela, Konsi Ayet, Ogen, Opira, Okumu, Richard Otim, Santo Oveka, David Okwera, Francis Kitara, George, Ronald Labeja, Christopher, Celestino, Vincent Okot, Ochana, Charles Abonga, David Oti Moyo, Christine, Pasca, Oluge, Opira Bosco, and Oriema. The LRA fighters forced the abductees to carry looted items from the camp for long distances. The loads were extremely heavy. Most of the civilians could barely carry them. Some civilians were forced to carry injured LRA fighters. The abductees were under armed guard to prevent their escape. LRA fighters constantly beat and kicked abductees with their guns, sticks, and their hands to make them walk faster. Some were tied to each other to make escape impossible. Many of the abductees were forced to walk barefoot or not fully clothed through the bush for a long distance. Witnesses have told us that they were helpless and shaking with fear that they would be killed if they were not able to carry their loads anymore. The LRA indeed killed abducted people who were unable to walk or dropped luggage. As recalled, one of them was Pangarazio Onek, a trader between 30 and 40 years of age. He had to carry 3 or 4 basins full of beans. When he told his abductors that he could not manage anymore to carry the load, he was unbound, made to sit down, and then shot 3 times in the head. Witness P249 told the chamber that when he could not walk further after 2 weeks of being with Dominic Ongwen's group, LRA fighters beat him until he was unconscious and left him. The witness managed to drag himself for 9 days to get home. After leaving Pachule, Vincent Oti addressed the abductees at the LRA meeting point. He approached them for settling in IDP camps set up by the government and told them that they were being punished for staying in the camp. Dominic Ongwen also spoke to a group of abductees, telling them that anyone who escaped or dropped goods would be killed and the abductees would be trained as soldiers. The day after the attack, older abductees were released. Younger abductees, among them boys and girls under the age of 15, were retained and continued in the LRA. The younger abductees were so-called distributed amongst the LRA commanders. Some of them, including 4 girls and 3 men, among Dominic Ongwen's group. The younger girls were taken to the commanders as so-called ting-tings, that is to say domestic servants, to carry out household work. The older girls were given as so-called wives to the commanders. The younger male abductees were taken in as newly recruited members of the LRA. This happened on the 10th October 2003 during the attack on Pajula IDP camp and his aftermath. On 29th April 2004, LRA fighters attacked Odek IDP camp. Odek IDP camp was situated in Odek sub-county, Omoro County, Gulu district. While Dominic Ongwen did not enter the camp, the LRA fighters who attacked the camp were subordinate to him and acted on his orders. Dominic Ongwen had ordered them to attack the camp in two groups. One should focus on the military barracks in the camp, and the other on the civilian areas. He specifically had ordered to target everyone they find at Odek IDP camp. This included civilians. He also instructed his fighters to loot food and abduct civilians. The attack started as the residents and several government soldiers were dispersing from a gathering. At least 30 LRA attackers executed Dominic Ongwen's orders. Amongst them were children under the age of 15. The LRA fighters were heavily armed with assault rifles, a mortar, an anti-tank weapon, and a so-called B-10 gun. Following Dominic Ongwen's orders, the LRA attacked Odek IDP camp from the northern side of the camp. One group of attackers attacked the military barracks situated about a few hundred meters from the camp. They killed some soldiers there, overwhelmed the soldiers, and burned the barracks down. The other group of fighters spread into the civilian area. In particular, they went to the trading center where they attacked the civilian residents. They looted shops and civilian homes. They also shot, beat, and abducted civilians and forced them to carry looted goods. During the attack, a female LRA attacker raped a civilian resident of the camp with a comb and a stick used for cooking, while the victim's husband was forced to watch. The rape was committed with such force that the victim started to bleed. The LRA fighters also fired their weapons at civilians. They did so under orders to shoot civilians in the chest and head to ensure that they died. At least 52 civilians died as a result of the injuries sustained in the camp or in the course of the retreat. Many civilians were shot as they ran away from the LRA. LRA fighter P264 was ordered to spray bullets inside civilian houses. Other LRA fighters set at least one hut on fire with civilians inside. Among the victims were elderly civilians, children, a pregnant woman, as well as women carrying babies tied to their back. The bodies of the dead were scattered everywhere across the camp. Witness Helen Opoka Achan summarized it succinctly when she testified, I quote, "They came to kill." The evidence shows that the LRA killed at least the following persons in the course of the attack: Adoni Okulu, Agudu's wife and her grandson, Betty Adong and her daughter Ajok, Catherine Amono. She was shot whilst she had a child to her back, however, the child survived. Okeni, Aldo Okello, Ayita Labanya, Charles Obur, Doris Apio, Gennaro Ongwen, Jimmy Ochok, Catherine Laka, Kevin Apio, Kerubina Akayo, Keikia Okech, Veronica Auma, Mary Achayo, Monica Achiro, Wilson Okoya, Obango Moko, Petwang Opio, Thomas Opio, Thomas Ochok, Valentino Okot, Walter Ochok, Atik Kon, a further unnamed camp resident, Mary Agudu, Doreen Ochok, DP, Achayo, Aboni, witness P269's mother-in-law and her grandson, and an unnamed girl found in the river. LRA fighters also attempted to kill civilians during the attack. At least 10 were the victims of attempted killings. An LRA fighter fired shots through the door of a locked hut, killing the male inhabitant and wounding the female inhabitant in the neck. The evidence shows that the LRA attempted to kill at least the following persons in the course of the attack: Santa Akello, Betty Atenyo, Christopher Moro, David Bua, witness P252, Kengali and his wife, a man by a borassus palm tree, Okot LC's mother, and a woman shot in the mouth. The killing of civilians was not confined to Odek IDP campsite. Some civilians abducted from the camp were killed when they struggled or tried to escape. LRA fighters killed a young abductee because his feet were too swollen and he was unable to walk any further. Amongst the persons killed in the course of the LRA retreat from Odek IDP camp, there were Aroja, Atir, Hilary Kilama, Lalam, and Rose Aveco. Furthermore, 9 adult men who had been abducted from the camp and forced to carry an LRA fighter who had been wounded during the attack were also later killed by LRA fighters when the commander died of his injuries. These 9 men were David Ochok, James Ayala, James Titus Latigo, Kidega, Lagi, Patrick Opap Odong, Pamala Okot, Ochok, and Fabio Otto. Abductees, including children as young as 11 or 12 years old, were forced to carry looted items away from the camp. Abductees suffered instances of grave physical abuse at the hands of the LRA fighters, such as beatings with sticks and guns. Abductees were forced to carry heavy loads for long distances under constant threat of harm. Some of them walked these long distances barefoot. One abductee was forced to kill another abductee with a club, spraying the brains of the victim all over his face, after which he was also forced to inspect corpses. Another abductee was forced to watch people being killed. If the abductees walked too slowly, they were beaten or killed. Witness P275 describes how a woman who could no longer walk because pus was coming out of her swollen wounds was struck on her head so that her head split with the rear of the skull falling forward. LRA fighters beat women whose babies were crying with the butt of their guns. Some mothers were forced to abandon their children in the bush so that they could carry the luggage. Witnesses described how these abandoned babies lay naked in the cold and wet crying. A very young baby of about 2 months was thrown into a rubbish pit. In the course of the attack, LRA fighters also abducted at least 40 civilian residents from the camp, men, women, and children. Amongst many others who were abducted and forced to work for the LRA were Atir, Hilary Kilama, Lalam, Rose Aveco, David Ochok, James Titus Latigo, James Ayala, Kidega, Lagi, Patrick Opap Odong, Pamala Okot, Ochok, Fabio Otto, Onek, witness P275, witness P269 and P252, Brian Odonkoniero, Helen Adong, Alice Kidega, Achan, Ada, Agnes Adoch, Ayok, Akanyo, Apio, Atenyo, Carolina Lagulu, Dennis Otema, Doreen Aluku, Kadoge, Kala Adong, Joyce Aneno, Ochaka, Paul Ojara, Richard Okello, Santa Oling, Venturina Akello, and the wife of Olette Okello. Helen Opoka Achan, during her testimony before the court, described her experience when armed fighters entered her home and dragged her children out. Quote, "You cannot stop them. They took all my children out of the house." Unquote. Some abductees were released after a few days in the bush. Others were killed or integrated into the LRA, including into Dominic Ongwen's household. One civilian named Achok, who was abducted by the LRA from the camp, was later made a forced so-called wife. During the attack, LRA attackers broke into homes and shops and looted food and other items from the camp, both from shops in the trading center and from civilian homes. Shops had been broken into and literally emptied of their contents. The food aid, which had been recently distributed to the camp, was looted by the attackers. The LRA distributed the items looted from Odek IDP camp to the households of different commanders, including Dominic Ongwen. After the attackers joined the rest of the group commanded by Dominic Ongwen. Dominic Ongwen thanked the fighters for the execution of the attack. Afterwards, he communicated the results of the attack on military radio to other LRA commanders and to Joseph Kony. He reported that his fighters successfully carried out an attack on Odek IDP camp, killing people, abducting civilians, and looting in the camp. After Dominic Ongwen had left the radio call, Joseph Kony stated, quote, "Excellent. This guy has pleased me very much. I wish he threw them to the ground for me," unquote. This happened on the 29th April 2004 during the attack on Odek IDP camp and its aftermath. Barely 3 weeks later, on or about 19th May 2004, LRA fighters attacked Lukodi IDP camp. They were sent by Dominic Ongwen. Lukodi IDP camp was situated in Bungatira sub-county, Aswa County, Gulu district. A large contingent of civilians resided in the camp at the time of the attack. At a gathering the morning of the day before the attack, Dominic Ongwen had instructed LRA fighters to attack Lukodi IDP camp and everyone present at that location, including civilians, and to take food from the camp. After receiving the orders given by Dominic Ongwen, the attackers left for the attack. Dominic Ongwen stayed behind at the location of the pre-attack gathering. In the evening on the day of the attack, at least 80 LRA fighters executed Dominic Ongwen's orders and attacked Lukodi IDP camp. Amongst them were fighters under the age of 15. The LRA fighters were again heavily armed with an assortment of weapons. Following the usual pattern of attacks against IDP camps, part of the LRA fighters went into the civilian areas of the camp, while some others went to the barracks to fight the government soldiers. Government soldiers engaged the LRA fighters. However, after a short fight, the government soldiers quickly fled. The remaining civilian population in the camp were left defenseless. We see here again the sad pattern that the government forces were not able to protect the civilian population in the camps. The LRA fighters then targeted civilians within the camp. Witness P187 testified, quote, "They came prepared and ready to kill. They wanted to kill people," unquote. LRA fighters killed civilians in Lukodi IDP camp, men, women, and children. At least 48 civilians died as a result of injuries sustained during the attack. LRA fighters attempted to kill many others. Civilians were shot, burned, and beaten to death. Civilians, including children, were thrown into burning houses. One witness testified, quote, "Some children were put in a polythene bag and beaten to death. Some were locked inside and burned inside. Others were put in a bag and thrown in the bush," unquote. Witness P301 testified that he saw, I quote, "bodies hacked in a barbaric way." The evidence shows that the following people were among those killed by the LRA within the camp: Keneri Okot, Kenneth Lakot, Kilama Aloyo, Kilama Kidega, Jacqueline Ane, Millie Anek, Akello Achi, Innocent Okello, Ochoko. With regard to the last three names, Akello Aji tried to run and the LRA cut her and carried her and threw her back into the fire, along with two other children, Innocent and Ochoko. An unnamed man shouting at the LRA, Christine Ajok, Otong Apio, David Otim, who was stabbed together with another man who remains unnamed, Akweza Otok, Beatrice's son. His body was found in a sack. The LRA and other abductees had been stepping on his body in the sack as they moved. Charles Odong, Jacinta Aol, Yoyina Angom, Lalobo's son. He had been crying for his mother and the LRA fighters shot him in the mouth. Tesira Oroma, Ochara, Okwera, Olvedo, Ochaka's wife, one unnamed teenage girl, Onen Chan, witness P24's mother, Min Ochoko, Ochi, Atim, Charles Aniva, Danger Joseph Ordiem, James Opiro, Janet Lalua Akello, Joseph Ojara, Obedi, Rose Kiter, Tabicha Alum, Vincent Ochaya, Santa Oroma, and a further person whose identity is kept confidential from the general public. LRA fighters attempted to kill at least 11 other civilians who managed to survive. The fighters shot at civilians and in some cases wounded them. Civilians were beaten and left for death. Civilians, including children, were thrown into burning houses. The following persons were among the persons who survived these LRA acts of violence: Pierina Aya, Florence Adong, Adong Pasca, Piloya, Joel Opio, Ojoko, an unnamed elderly woman, Nieko, two unnamed girls who had been shot, and an unnamed girl with a burned leg. The killing of civilians was not confined to the area of Lukodi IDP camp. After they left Lukodi, LRA fighters killed persons they had abducted from the camp. Among the civilians killed in the retreat were Nancy Akello, an unnamed man stabbed with a bayonet, another unnamed abductee, Justine Omoni, Aleka and Charles Obwoya. Indeed, the LRA fighters abducted at least 29 civilians, men, women and children, to carry looted goods from the camp. Among the abductees were witness P24, Olanya, Oleka, Onek, witness P187, Joel Opio, Lili Apio, Christine Alanyo, Mili Aya, Beatrice, Marie Aol, Min Lagum, Min Ochak, Min Ochora, Alora, Okumu, Nancy Akello, Justine Omoni, Lakwetch, Aleka, and Charles Obwoya. Abductees were forced to carry heavy loads, some for long distances, while tied in a line together and under armed guard to prevent their escape. They were under constant threat of beating or death. Some abductees had their children strapped to their back when they were abducted. Mothers were forced to abandon their children in the bush. LRA fighters also threw small children, including babies, into the bush because the children were crying and making it difficult for their mothers to carry looted goods. Witness P25 testified that her 2-week-old son was naked when he was thrown into the bush. She was beaten throughout her abduction, as were other civilians. LRA fighters kept slapping and threatening her. Witness P187 was wounded by an LRA fighter as well. She was also raped by an LRA fighter. Some of the abductees were tied together. The abducted civilians were under guard to prevent their escape and constant threat of beatings or death. LRA fighters entered civilian homes and shops and looted food and other property from them in Lukodi IDP camp. During their attack on the camp, LRA fighters set huts of the civilians on fire. Approximately 210 civilian huts in the camp were burned. Civilians' household goods, including food stocks, were destroyed in these fires. Domestic animals, such as goats, were also burned by the LRA. In this way, the affected civilians, already displaced from their homes because of instability in the region, suffered another catastrophic loss. LRA fighters returned from the attack and reported to Dominic Ongwen about the success of their mission. Dominic Ongwen also reported his soldiers' attack on Lukodi IDP camp to other LRA commanders, including Joseph Kony and Vincent Oti. Dominic Ongwen, in his own words, took responsibility for the attack on Lukodi IDP camp, including specifically for the harm done to civilians. Other high-ranking members of the LRA leadership commended him for his, what they called, work. Shortly after the Lukodi attack, Dominic Ongwen was promoted by Joseph Kony to the rank of colonel. This happened on or about the 19th May 2004, during the attack on Lukodi IDP camp and its aftermath. Again, only a few weeks later, on 8th June 2004, LRA fighters subordinate to Dominic Ongwen attacked Abok IDP camp. The camp was situated in Ngai sub-county, Apache district. It contained thousands of civilians displaced by frequent LRA attacks in the region. Prior to the attack, Dominic Ongwen ordered LRA fighters subordinate to him to attack this camp. At a gathering in the foothills of Ato, Dominic Ongwen addressed the troops and gave instructions to go and loot food, abduct people, attack the barracks, burn down the camp and the barracks. Dominic Ongwen did not go to Abok as part of the fighting force. In the evening of that day, at least 20 LRA fighters executed Dominic Ongwen's orders and attacked Abok IDP camp. Amongst them were fighters under the age of 15. The LRA fighters were armed with an assortment of weapons. They went past the old barracks in the south of the camp and entered the camp firing their guns. LRA fighters went to the civilian area in the camp, and a contingent of the fighters eventually ended up near the new barracks in the northeast of the camp. While government soldiers were able to defend the new barracks, the soldiers in the area where the civilians lived, again, were not able to stop the LRA's attack on the camp. These soldiers fled the camp. In the course of the attack, LRA fighters killed at least 28 civilian residents of the camp by shooting, burning, and/or beating them. The following persons were amongst those killed by the LRA in the course of the attack: Fabio Ongwen, Hatari Aniima, two of Hatari Aniima's children, Daniel Okite and Monica Ayugi, DP Okello, Alex Ongwen, Barikia Adonia, Albino Okal, Justina Okal, and Evelyn Akello. Survivors returning the next morning found bodies strewn throughout the camp, including those of children. Some bodies were burned or had the backs of their heads smashed, others had been shot. Dead bodies were found inside houses, at doorsteps, and among the remains of burned huts. These civilians were killed by LRA fighters. One of Dominic Ongwen's subordinate commanders intruded into a house with over 10 civilian inhabitants, forced several to carry looted goods, and then closed the door and set fire to the house with the remaining inhabitants inside. LRA fighters also attempted to kill civilians both during the attack and its aftermath. The evidence shows that the following persons were amongst those the LRA attempted to kill within the camp: Jacob Opio, Ciprian Ogola, and Robson Oper. In the aftermath of the attack, the LRA also attempted to kill Gventorina Akite, an elderly woman. LRA fighters had ordered her to carry heavy loads, including at one point 2 goats. When she could no longer bear the weight, an LRA fighter beat and strangled her and cut her with a machete. LRA fighters passing her on the road hit her. She was left for dead, but managed to crawl back home to the camp. LRA fighters abducted many civilians and forced them to carry heavy looted goods and an injured fighter for long distances, oftentimes under the threat of beatings or death. LRA fighters forced an abductee to kill another abductee as a lesson to others who were thinking of escaping. The abductee used a club like a stick to beat the victim on the head until he died. Among the civilians abducted and forced to work for the LRA were Charles Amodo, Gventorina Akite, Evelyn Akello, Robson Oper, witness P280, Thomas Okite's daughter, Ongwen, Armeni, Lucy Akello, Molly Ayugi, Monica Adur, Naiti Atim, Dilis Avor, and witness V2. Some persons abducted by the LRA during the attack were rescued by a UPDF contingent that pursued the LRA fighters as they left Abok camp. Some of the abductees were killed in captivity. Others eventually escaped and returned home. Some remained with the LRA, including in Dominic Ongwen's household. During the attack on the camp, the LRA fighters looted civilian houses and shops at the trading center, taking away all sorts of food items, as well as a radio, money, clothing, cooking utensils, and medicine. Furthermore, LRA fighters set huts on fire. Several hundred civilian homes were burned during the attack. Civilians' food stocks were also destroyed. Dominic Ongwen communicated the results of the attack on the LRA military radio to other LRA commanders and to Joseph Kony. He reported that his fighters carried out an attack on Abok IDP camp, erecting fire and burning everything that was there, including huts in the camp. This happened on 8th June 2004 during the attack on Abok IDP camp and its aftermath. In relation to Dominic Ongwen's actions in connection with these 4 attacks, the Chamber has found that he committed a number of war crimes or crimes against humanity. However, the Chamber has not upheld the charges of the war crime of cruel treatment and of the crime against humanity of other inhumane acts. This is due to impermissible concurrence of these 2 crimes with the crimes of torture as a war crime and as a crime against humanity, respectively. We will see this in detail in the verdict later on. In addition to the crimes committed within the context of the 4 attacks against the 4 IDP camps, Dominic Ongwen is further responsible for sexual and gender-based crimes committed directly by him against 7 women. The 7 women were abducted and so-called distributed to Dominic Ongwen and assigned to his household. They were not allowed to leave. Dominic Ongwen placed them under heavy guard. They were told or came to understand that if they tried to escape, they would be killed. During the period relevant to the charges, between 1st July 2002 and 31st December 2005, 5 of these women were forced to be Dominic Ongwen's so-called wives. Witnesses P99, 101, 214, 226, and 227. The other 2, witnesses P235 and 236, were so-called ting-tings in his household. They would also later be forced to become Dominic Ongwen's so-called wives. That, however, occurred after the period relevant to the charges brought by the prosecutor against Dominic Ongwen. During the period relevant to the charges, Dominic Ongwen had sex by force with 4 of his so-called wives. Witnesses P101, 214, 226, and 227. This happened on a repeated basis whenever Dominic Ongwen wanted. During this period, P101 became pregnant twice and gave birth to a girl and a boy fathered by Dominic Ongwen. Also, P214 became pregnant and gave birth to a girl fathered by Dominic Ongwen. All 7 women were subject to beatings at Dominic Ongwen's command at any time. They were hit with canes and sticks. Some beatings knocked them unconscious, left them unable to walk, and left permanent scars. The 7 women had to perform different domestic duties. Failing to perform these tasks led to punishment by beating. On 1st July 2002, Dominic Ongwen forced witness P226 to beat to death a captured UPDF soldier near Patongo, northern Uganda. She hit him once, as did other girls. She had blood splattered on her clothes. She had never killed anyone before, and this was part of the reason given by Dominic Ongwen on why he selected her to do this. This experience caused her severe anguish. In late 2002 or early 2003 in northern Uganda, soon after witnesses P235's abduction, Dominic Ongwen ordered her, along with other abductees, to beat people to death until their blood splashed on the abductees. Although she eventually did not have to carry out the killings, this experience caused her severe anguish. With regard to the aforementioned acts, the Chamber has inter alia entered a conviction of Dominic Ongwen for forced marriage as an other inhumane act, pursuant to Article 7, Paragraph 1K of the Rome Statute, a crime against humanity. It has found that, at the time relevant to the charges, Dominic Ongwen executed the specific legal elements of the crime of forced marriage against witnesses P99, 101, 214, 226, and 227. The Chamber wishes to outline shortly the main legal consideration for this conviction, since they are not self-explanatory. The reasons are explained in a more detailed manner in the judgment. The Chamber considers forced marriage to be an other inhumane act falling under the aforementioned provision of the Rome Statute as a crime against humanity. Every person enjoys the fundamental right to enter a marriage with the free and full consent of another person. Marriage creates a status based on a consensual and contractual relationship. It is an institution and also an act or right. The central element of forced marriage is the imposition of this status on the victim. This means the imposition, regardless of the will of the victim, of duties that are associated with marriage and with a consequent social stigma. Such a state, beyond its illegality, has social, ethical, and even religious effects, which have a serious impact on the victim's physical and psychological well-being. The victims may see themselves as being bonded or united to another person, despite the lack of consent. Additionally, a given social group may see the victim as being a so-called legitimate spouse. To the extent forced marriage results in the birth of children, this creates even more complex emotional and psychological effects on the victims and their children, beyond the obvious physical effects of pregnancy and childbearing. Accordingly, the harm suffered from forced marriage can consist of being ostracized from the community, mental trauma, the serious attack on the victim's dignity, and the deprivation of the victim's fundamental rights to choose his or her spouse. As is explained in detail in the judgment, the conduct underlying forced marriage is not fully captured by other crimes against humanity, such as sexual slavery or rape, crimes of which Dominic Ongwen has been found responsible as well. Also, the Chamber has found that, during the time relevant to the charges, Dominic Ongwen committed the crime of forced pregnancy as both a crime against humanity and a war crime with regard to witnesses P101 and P214. This is the first time that the crime of forced pregnancy is considered by a trial chamber of this court. The Chamber's interpretation of the legal elements of this crime and the related findings on the basis of the available evidence are set out in detail in the judgment. Beyond these sexual and gender-based crimes directly perpetrated by Dominic Ongwen against the seven women, so-called distributed to him, Dominic Ongwen, together with Joseph Kony and the Sinya Brigade leadership, engaged in a coordinated and methodical effort to commit sexual and gender-based crimes against women and girls. In the process, they relied on the LRA soldiers under their control. LRA fighters abducted women and girls in northern Uganda and forced them to serve in Sinya Brigade as so-called wives of members of the Sinya Brigade and as domestic servants. The evidence received by the Chamber overwhelmingly demonstrates that the abuse of women and girls in the LRA was truly systemic and institutional. This included forced marriage, sexual violence, and forced pregnancy as well. As witness P14, a senior officer during the relevant period, stated, quote, "There is no single woman who voluntarily joined. All were abducted," unquote. At some point in 2002, Joseph Kony convened everybody together and, as one witness put it, quote, "then told us that whoever did not have a wife was to get a wife, and that there were going to be abductions. Beautiful girls should be abducted." Witness P205 stated that Dominic Ongwen instructed that, quote, "two of the girls, the two beautiful girls, should be taken good care of, and that they should be taken to him," unquote. Another witness, P264, testified that Dominic Ongwen gave, as he worded it, women to soldiers as a reward. Witness P54 stated that he saw Dominic Ongwen making such decisions several times and described the process as follows, quote, "When the girls are brought, when he sees that a particular officer is ready to have a wife, then he would say, 'You go with this girl, let her stay at your home. She is now your wife.' The abducted girls and women were threatened to be killed if they tried to escape. Witness P396 testified that on one occasion, a girl was brought to the commanders after she was caught trying to escape. Everybody was called to see what was happening, quote, 'so that we know what will happen to us if we try to escape,' unquote. The witness stated that an LRA soldier beat the girl with a stick until she died. P396 specified that Dominic Ongwen was present when the girl was killed. As generally with all LRA abductees, the evidence indicates specifically that also abducted women and girls were forced to beat or kill other abductees for attempting escape or breaking the rules. Witness P352 described being forced on Dominic Ongwen's orders to take part in the killing of another girl who had been accused of witchcraft. Witness P351 similarly stated that she was forced to step on a boy who had tried to escape but was caught until he died. She stated that the boys with the guns, as she worded it, who forced her to perform this act, said that they wanted the new abductees who had not killed people to come and kill someone. The girls would be forced to live with male members of the LRA as husband and so-called wives. This happened regularly at a very young age. Witness P101, one of the so-called wives of Dominic Ongwen, described the horrors of being a young girl in the LRA. Quote, "To my understanding and from my observation on what happened to me, when young girls are abducted, you are raped while you're still young. If you are 11 years old or 12 years old, if there is a high-ranking commander who is kind, then they will let you actually mature a little bit. But with the rest of them, they will just abduct you and make you a wife at a very young age. This is something extremely bad, and culturally, in a Choli culture, raping young girls is extremely bad. Frequently, abducted women and girls were considered so-called wives from the time they were first forced to have sex with the man they had been assigned to. The abducted women and girls were not able to refuse. Witness P138 testified, quote, "If we refuse to go to a particular husband, that means that you do not want to live. That means that you will be killed. And you will be killed immediately. So you make the decision, do I want to live or do I want to die? So you make that decision. If they give you to a particular man, if you decide to live, then you go to that man. That's how it is," unquote. Senior brigade members regularly forced abducted women and girls who had been so-called distributed to them into sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse was specifically considered to be part of the role of the so-called wives. The first sexual intercourse was regularly enforced upon women and girls at a very young age. Oftentimes, the girls would be seen by their male captors as sexually mature after their first menstruation. The women and girls were unable to resist. This was due to the physical force used by the senior brigade members, and due to the threat of punishment for disobedience, and their dependence on the Sinja Brigade members for survival in the bush. The abducted women and girls were treated as the exclusive property of the man they were distributed to. An abducted girl, witness P352, told the chamber that about a month after she joined Dominic Ongwen's group, a certain commander called her to his tent. P352 stated, quote, "When I arrived, he asked if I really knew what had brought me here. I said I did not know, and he told me to make his bed and that I now was his wife. I started crying and thought, how could I become his wife? He was an old man. He had gray hair, and I did not want to be his wife. When I started crying, he asked me, between death and life, what do you choose? He asked me this twice, and then I said, I choose life." Witnesses P3574 story is very similar. She testified that one day a commander called her and told her, quote, "You are going to be my wife. Like the women I released, you are going to be with me and have children. So you will stay with me here where I sleep." Her statement continues as following, quote, "I became fearful and started shaking because I thought that he was going to start to sleep with me, and I was just a child. He was quite big, much older than me, maybe between 20 and 30 years old. I did not respond because I feared that if I replied, he would beat me. I think he expected me to say that I accepted to be his wife. He told me that from that day I had to make his bed, wash his clothes, and go to sleep with him. I did not want to be his wife because I was too young. I did not know what it was to be with a man, and it was not my wish to be with him." Dominic Ongwen personally assigned women and girls as so-called wives and used his authority as LRA commander to enforce the so-called marriage in Sinja Brigade. Witness P351 testified that the first night that she was in the household of a commander, after being told by Dominic Ongwen that she was now that commander's so-called wife, another of the commander's so-called wives told her that he was calling her and that she, quote, "should follow any instructions she was given because we have no relatives in the bush and we have no support, and if we do not follow the rules, we would be killed." The witness continued, quote, "I was only crying. I did not say anything, nor refuse to sleep with him, because I was fearful, because he was a commander, and if I said anything or refused, I would be killed." Witness P351 stated that after that first night, the commander would sleep with her and his other so-called wives alternately. That regularly happened when commanders had several so-called wives, which often was the case. Witness P351 testified about how painful this experience was for the women and continued, quote, "I would not share my pain with anyone in the bush. I thought that if I shared this, I may be killed, because all the time I saw that girls who made mistakes were being killed. I was very scared, because he was the man who raped me. I did not know the people I stayed with, and I did not trust anybody." The abducted women and girls were also used as domestic servants, forced to perform work, such as household work and carrying items. Also, this rule was strictly enforced by physical punishment. As a result of the sexual and physical violence and the living conditions to which they were submitted, the abducted women and girls suffered severe, barely imaginable physical and mental pain. Lastly, senior soldiers, in execution of orders of Joseph Kony, Dominic Ongwen, and the Sinja Brigade leadership, abducted between 1st July 2002 and 31st December 2005, innumerable children under 15 years of age in northern Uganda, and forced them to serve as senior fighters. As witness P231 worded it illustratively, quote, "The abduction means an initiation into the army, starting from 10. As already described, children under the age of 15 were also abducted during the 4 charged attacks. Dominic Ongwen abducted children himself. He saw them not as children, but as his soldiers, as he stated to witness Irumba Tingira, quote, "You call those kids children, but I call them my soldiers. So we are talking about my soldiers," unquote. After the abduction, those children underwent a cruel initiation into the LRA. They were regularly severely beaten shortly after the abduction, with the purpose, as several witnesses stated, quote, "to beat out the civilian." Furthermore, with some regularity, recruits were forced to brutally kill, or were forced to witness brutal killings shortly after their abduction. Following their abduction, children under the age of 15 years were then integrated into Senior Brigade with the aim of using them in hostilities. Upon abduction into Senior Brigade, the children were given training in fighting skills, including the use of firearms. Recruits were not taught, as part of their training, to distinguish between civilians and combatants, or between civilian objects and military objects. Finally, children under 15 years of age serving as soldiers in Senior Brigade took part in fighting. Many of them were killed during fighting. During all 4 charged attacks, children under the age of 15 participated in the hostilities. Dominic Ongwen is fully responsible for all the crimes found by the Chamber. The Chamber did not find evidence that supported the claim by the defense that Dominic Ongwen suffered from any mental disease or disorder during the period relevant to the charges, or that he committed these crimes under duress. First of all, a huge number of witnesses who described Dominic Ongwen's actions and interactions with others did not provide any testimony which could corroborate historical diagnosis of mental disease or defect during the relevant period of the charges. On the contrary, the overwhelming evidence paints a picture of Dominic Ongwen as a person in full possession of his mental abilities. He is described by his subordinates as an extremely capable fighter and commander whom they loved to follow. He planned his attacks carefully and assessed the risks together with his officers. He was repeatedly lauded by other commanders, including Joseph Kony, for his so-called good work. The Chamber in this context finds furthermore particularly important the evidence of witnesses who were held as his so-called wives. The Chamber in this context finds furthermore particularly important the evidence of witnesses who were held as his so-called wives, or were otherwise captive in Dominic Ongwen's immediate proximity at various times over the course of many years. None of them observed any behavior by Dominic Ongwen suggestive of mental disease or defect. The assessment by the Chamber is in line with the expert evidence of Professor Mesey, Dr. Abo, and Professor Weierstahl-Pust, who in a convincing way, based on their expert opinion and an analysis of the evidence, did not identify any mental disease or disorder in Dominic Ongwen during the period of the charges. Secondly, Dominic Ongwen did not commit the crimes found by the Chamber under duress. there is no basis at all in the evidence to hold that he was subjected to a threat of imminent death or imminent or continuing serious bodily harm to himself or other persons at the time of his conduct underlying the charged crimes. The evidence also shows that Dominic Ongwen was not in a situation of complete subordination vis-à-vis Joseph Kony, but frequently acted independently and even contested orders received from Joseph Kony. He was not a puppet on a string, as is evidenced amongst others by the testimony of one LRA fighter. Quote, "Well, Dominic would not just engage in something without being sure. If there is an order from his senior, he will sit down with his officers, and they would assess. If they think that is not practical, or they feel it's not feasible, Dominic would object to doing that. But if he knew he was able to accomplish that, he would do that." Unquote. The evidence furthermore indicates that in the period of the charges, Dominic Ongwen did not face any prospective punishment by death or serious bodily harm when he disobeyed Joseph Kony. He had also a realistic possibility of leaving the LRA, like many other commanders of the LRA successfully did, which he did not pursue. Rather, he rose in rank and position, including during the period of the charges, because, as Kony worded it, quote, "He's performing very well." Finally, he committed some of the crimes in private, sometimes sexual crimes in the complete privacy of his sleeping place. In view of these circumstances, it is impossible to think that he could have committed his acts under any threats. Thus, there exists no ground excluding Dominic Ongwen's criminal responsibility. His guilt has been established beyond any reasonable doubt. I have now come to the end of the oral summary of the Chamber's findings. Continue. Good. The Chamber will now proceed to pronounce the verdict, as detailed in the written judgment. The verdict in this case is particularly exceptionally long and complex. The accused may remain seated. Trial Chamber 9 of the International Criminal Court, for the reasons set out in detail in the judgment, and on the basis of the evidence submitted and discussed before the Chamber at trial, and the entire proceedings. Pursuant to Article 74, Paragraph 2 of the Statute, finds Dominic Ongwen, under count 1 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of attack against the civilian population as such, pursuant to Articles 8, Paragraph 2e, Roman 1, and 25, Paragraph 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 10th October 2003 at or near Padula IDP camp. Under count 2 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of murder, pursuant to Article 7, Paragraph 1a and 25, Paragraph 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 10th October 2003 at or near Padula IDP camp. Under count 3 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of murder, pursuant to Articles 8, Paragraph 2, C Roman 1, and 25, Paragraph 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 10th October 2003 at or near Padula IDP camp. Under count 4 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of torture, pursuant to Article 7, Paragraph 1f, and 25, Paragraph 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 10th October 2003 at or near Padula IDP camp. Under count 5 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of torture, pursuant to Articles 8, paragraph 2c, Roman 1, and 25, paragraph 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 10th October 2003 at or near Pajula IDP camp. Under count 6 of the charges, not guilty of the war crime of cruel treatment, pursuant to Articles 8, paragraph 2c, Roman 1, and 25, paragraph 3a or c or d, Roman 1 and 2, or 28a of the Rome Statute, on 10th October 2003 at or near Pajula IDP camp. Under count 7 of the charges, not guilty of the crime against humanity of other inhumane acts, pursuant to Article 7, paragraph 1k and 25, paragraph 3a or c or d, Roman 1 and 2, or 28a of the Rome Statute on 10th October 2003 at or near Pajula IDP camp. Under count 8 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of enslavement, pursuant to Article 7, paragraph 1c and 25, paragraph 3 of the Rome Statute, committed on 10th October 2003 at or near Pajula IDP camp. Under count 9 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of pillaging, pursuant to Articles 8, paragraph 2e, Roman 5, and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 10th October 2003 at or near Pajula IDP camp. Under count 10 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of persecution on political grounds of civilians perceived by the LRA as being affiliated with or supporting the Ugandan government, by attack against the civilian population, murder, torture, enslavement and pillaging, committed on 10th October 2003 at or near Pajula IDP camp, pursuant to Articles 7, paragraph 1h and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute. Under count 11 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of attack against the civilian population as such, pursuant to Articles 8, 2e, Roman 1 and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 12 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of murder, pursuant to Articles 7, 1a and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 13 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of murder, pursuant to Articles 8, 2c, Roman 1, and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 14 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of attempted murder, pursuant to Articles 7, paragraph 1a and 25, 3f and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 15 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of attempted murder, pursuant to Articles 8, 2c, Roman 1, and 25, 3f and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 16 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of torture, pursuant to Articles 7, 1f and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 17 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of torture, pursuant to Articles 8, 2c, Roman 1 and 25, 3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 18 of the charges, not guilty of the crime against humanity of other inhumane acts, pursuant to Articles 7, 1k and 25, 3a or b or d, Roman 1 and 2 or 28a of the Rome Statute, on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 19 of the charges, not guilty of the war crime of cruel treatment, pursuant to Articles 8, 2c, Roman 1 and 25, 3a or b or d, Roman 1 and 2 or 28a of the Rome Statute, on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 20 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of enslavement, pursuant to Articles 7(1)c and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 21 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of pillaging, pursuant to Articles 8(2)e Roman 5 and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 22 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of outrages upon personal dignity, pursuant to Articles 8(2)c Roman 2 and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp. Under count 23 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of persecution on political grounds of civilians perceived by the LRA as being affiliated with or supporting the Ugandan government, by attack against the civilian population as such, murder, attempted murder, torture, enslavement, outrages upon personal dignity, and pillaging, committed on 29th April 2004 at or near Odek IDP camp, pursuant to Articles 7(1)h and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute. Under count 24 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of attack against the civilian population as such, pursuant to Articles 8(2)e Roman 1 and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 25 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of murder, pursuant to Article 7(1)a and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 26 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of murder, pursuant to Articles 8(2)c Roman 1 and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 27 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of attempted murder, pursuant to Articles 7(1)a and 25(3)f and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 28 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of attempted murder, pursuant to Articles 8(2)c Roman 1 and 25(3)f and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 29 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of torture, pursuant to Articles 7(1)f and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 30 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of torture, pursuant to Articles 8(2)c Roman 1 and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 31 of the charges, not guilty of the crime against humanity of other inhumane acts, pursuant to Articles 7(1)k and 25(3)a or b or d Roman 1 and 2 or 28a of the Rome Statute, on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 32 of the charges, not guilty of the war crime of cruel treatment, pursuant to Articles 8(2)c Roman 1 and 25(3)a or b or d Roman 1 and 2 or 28a of the Rome Statute, on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 33 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of enslavement, pursuant to Articles 7(1)c and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 34 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of pillaging, pursuant to Articles 8(2)e Roman 5 and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lokodi IDP camp. Under count 35 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of destruction of property, pursuant to Articles 8(2)e Roman 12 and 25(3)a of the Rome Statute, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lukodi IDP camp. Under count 36 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of persecution on political grounds of civilians perceived by the LRA as being affiliated with or supporting the Ugandan government by attack against the civilian population as such, murder, attempted murder, torture, enslavement, pillaging and destruction of property, committed on or about 19th May 2004 at or near Lukodi IDP camp, pursuant to Articles 7.1h and 25.3a of the Rome Statute. Under count 37 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of attack against the civilian population as such, pursuant to Articles 2e Roman 1 and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 38 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of murder, pursuant to Article 7, Paragraph 1a and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 39 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of murder, pursuant to Articles 8.2c Roman 1 and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 40 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of attempted murder, pursuant to Articles 7.1a and 25.3f and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 41 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of attempted murder, pursuant to Articles 8.2c Roman 1 and 25.3f and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 42 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of torture, pursuant to Articles 7.1f and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 43 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of torture, pursuant to Articles 8.2c Roman 1 and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 44 of the charges, not guilty of the crime against humanity of other inhumane acts, pursuant to Articles 7.1k and 25.3a or b or d Roman 1 and 2 or 28a of the Rome Statute on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 45 of the charges, not guilty of the war crime of cruel treatment, pursuant to Articles 8 Paragraph 2c Roman 1 and 25.3a or b or d Roman 1 and 2 or 28a of the Rome Statute on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 46 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of enslavement, pursuant to Articles 7.1c and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 47 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of pillaging, pursuant to Articles 8.2e Roman 5 and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 48 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of destruction of property, pursuant to Articles 8.2e Roman 12 and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near Abok IDP camp. Under count 49 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of persecution on political grounds of civilians perceived by the LRA as being affiliated with or supporting the Ugandan government by attack against the civilian population as such, murder, attempted murder, torture, enslavement, pillaging and destruction of property, committed on 8th June 2004 at or near a Bok IDP camp, pursuant to Articles 7.1h and 25.3a of the Rome Statute. Under count 50 of the charges, guilty of the crime of forced marriage, an inhumane act of a character similar to the acts set out in Article 7.1a to j as a crime against humanity, pursuant to Articles 7.1k and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, of witness P99 between 1st July 2002 and September 2002, of witness P101 between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, of witness P214 between September 2002 and 31st December 2005, of witness P226 between 1st July 2002 and sometime in 2003, of witness P227 between approximately April 2005 and 31st December 2005. Under count 51 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of torture, pursuant to Articles 7.1f and 25.3 of the Rome Statute, of witness P101 between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, of witness P214 between September 2002 and 31st December 2005, of witness P226 between 1st July 2002 and sometime in 2003, of witness P227 between approximately April 2005 and 31st December 2005. Under count 52 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of torture, pursuant to Articles 8.2c Roman 1 and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, of witness P101 between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, of witness P214 between September 2002 and 31st December 2005, of witness P226 between 1st July 2002 and sometime in 2003, of witness P227 between approximately April 2005 and 31st December 2005. Under count 53 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of rape, pursuant to Articles 7.1g and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, of witness P101 between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, of witness P214 between September 2002 and 31st December 2005, of witness P226 between 1st July 2002 and sometime in 2003, of witness P227 between approximately April 2005 and 31st December 2005. Under count 54 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of rape, pursuant to Articles 8.2e Roman 6 and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, of witness P101 between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, of witness P214 between September 2002 and 31st December 2005, of witness P226 between 1st July 2002 and sometime in 2003, of witness P227 between approximately April 2005 and 31st December 2005. Under count 55 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of sexual slavery, pursuant to Articles 7.1g and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, of witness P101 between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, of witness P214 between September 2002 and 31st December 2005, of witness P226 between 1st July 2002 and sometime in 2003, of witness P227 between approximately April 2005 and 31st December 2005. Under count 56 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of sexual slavery, pursuant to Articles 8.2e Roman 6 and 25.3a of the Rome Statute, of witness P101 between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, of witness P214 between September 2002 and 31st December 2005, of witness P226 between 1st July 2002 and sometime in 2003, of witness P227 between approximately April 2005 and 31st December 2005. Under count 57 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of enslavement, pursuant to Articles 7(1)(c) and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, of witness P99 between 1st July 2002 and September 2002, of witness P235 from September 2002 to 31st December 2005, of witness P236 between September 2002 and 31st December 2005. Under count 58 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of forced pregnancy, pursuant to Articles 7(1)(g) and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, of witness P101, 2 pregnancies between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, and of witness P214 sometime in 2005. Under count 59 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of forced pregnancy, pursuant to Articles 8(2)(e) Roman 6 and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, of witness P101, 2 pregnancies between 1st July 2002 and July 2004, and of witness P214 sometime in 2005. Under count 60 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of outrages upon personal dignity, pursuant to Articles 8(2)(c) Roman 2 and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, of witness P226 sometime in 2002 or early 2003, close to Patongo, northern Uganda, of witness P235 sometime in late 2002 or early 2003 at an unspecified location in northern Uganda. Under count 61 of the charges, guilty of the crime of forced marriage, an inhumane act of character similar to the act set out in Articles 7(1)(a) to J as a crime against humanity, pursuant to Articles 7(1)(k) and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, from at least 1st July 2002 until 31st December 2005. Under count 62 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of torture, pursuant to Articles 7(1)(f) and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, from at least 1st July 2002 until 31st December 2005. Under count 63 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of torture, pursuant to Articles 8(2)(c) Roman 1 and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, from at least 1st July 2002 until 31st December 2005. Under count 64 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of rape, pursuant to Articles 7(1)(g) and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, from at least 1st July 2002 until 31st December 2005. Under count 65 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of rape, pursuant to Articles 8(2)(e) Roman 6 and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, from at least 1st July 2002 until 31st December 2005. Under count 66 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of sexual slavery, pursuant to Articles 7(1)(g) and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, from at least 1st July 2002 until 31st December 2005. Under count 67 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of sexual slavery, pursuant to Articles 8(2)(e) Roman 6 and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, from at least 1st July 2002 until 31st December 2005. Under count 68 of the charges, guilty of the crime against humanity of enslavement, pursuant to Articles 7(1)(c) and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, from at least 1st July 2002 until 31st December 2005. Under count 69 and 70 of the charges, guilty of the war crime of conscripting children under the age of 15 into an armed group and using them to participate actively in hostilities, pursuant to Articles 8(2)(e) Roman 7 and 25(3)(a) of the Rome Statute, between 1st July 2002 and 31st December 2005 in northern Uganda. The This concludes the verdict rendered by the Chamber on Dominic Ongwen. The Chamber has therefore convicted Dominic Ongwen of a total of 61 crimes, compromising both crimes against humanity and war crimes. To try to sum up in a few words the lengthy and technical verdict rendered by the Chamber, Dominic Ongwen has been found guilty beyond reasonable doubt of a number of crimes committed in the context of the four specified attacks on the IDP camps of Pajule, Odek, Lukodi, and Abok. Attacks against the civilian population, murder, attempted murder, torture, enslavement, outrages upon personal dignity, pillaging, destruction of property, and persecution. Secondly, a number of sexual and gender-based crimes he committed against 7 women, whose names and individual stories are specified in the judgment, who were abducted and placed into his household, forced marriage, torture, rape, sexual slavery, enslavement, forced pregnancy, and outrages upon personal dignity. Thirdly, a number of further sexual and gender-based crimes he committed against girls and women within the Sinya Brigade. Forced marriage, torture, rape, sexual slavery, and enslavement. And lastly, the war crime of conscripting children under the age of 15 into the Sinya Brigade and using them to participate actively in hostilities. As I said, the written judgment, containing the full and reasoned statement of the Chamber's findings and conclusions, and which I repeat, remains the only authoritative document in this regard, has been issued by the Chamber this morning and will be notified shortly. In due course, the Chamber will impose on Dominic Ongwen the sentence for the crimes of which he has been convicted. For the purposes of determining the appropriate sentence, the Chamber will also consider submissions by the prosecutor, the defense from Mr. Dominic Ongwen, and the legal representatives of the participating victims. A decision in this regard, including as concerns the strict timelines of the proceedings leading to the imposition of the sentence, has also been issued by the Chamber this morning. It will be notified shortly as well. This concludes today's hearing for the delivery in open court of the judgment in the case of the prosecutor versus Dominic Ongwen. Court is adjourned.
All rise.